we hear the news. Kathleen Kennedy is out, and she has this plan for retirement. So you heard that first piece,
correct?
Right? Okay. Then the most recent stuff within the last 24 hours has been her Deadline article that comes out and says, hey, I am not, she's like, I want to say this, I'm not retiring right now. She basically says, like, I am not going to ever stop producing movies. I'm going to die producing movies. And then they press her a little bit further, and she's like, there is an exit strategy for her replacement. Like, she has definitely been working towards cultivating this. And she is saying, okay, within the next, she said either months, in the coming months, or at the end of this next year, there will be some sort of announcement. Now, I'm telling you, Star Wars Celebration is just around the corner. What a great time to bring out the new CEO of Lucasfilm. I mean, why not celebrate that where she's in sort of a safe place, right? She's in Japan. It's not like there's going to be a bunch of boos from the stage at Kathleen Kennedy in Japan. So you're going to have an announcement where she's like, I'm bringing out, this is my successor. We're going to work together for the next 9 months. And there's going to be this slow exit strategy. It's sort of what she's almost like trying to steal the thunder, if you will, from some content creators who are just like, let's go. They're loving it. And quite honestly, I think it's long overdue. What do you think?
I agree. Look, we've talked about Kathleen Kennedy so many times over the years, but now that we know that Kathleen Kennedy is leaving Star Wars, if you look at her legacy and track record over the course of these past, 13, 14 years, it's not been particularly good. I mean, if I had to grade it, I would probably give it a D, as like a generous D to give her, because really, if you first, we'll look at these successes. Okay, I would say, the Mandalorian, Rogue One, Andor. I think Andor season 2 looks really good, and then most of the animated stuff under her as the head of Star Wars has been pretty good, right?
Yep.
Clone Wars season 7, the end of Rebels, and Tales of the Jedi, Visions. You and I both really liked that. Thought that was a fun, cool thing. And while they haven't been, something that you and I have really raved about, like the Lego stuff, right, has been pretty good. She's still, the head of Lucasfilm. Video games have been okay. Like we never got a Battlefront 3, Battlefront 2 had a lot of issues and stuff like that. And you could say, well, that's just them licensing it out, but she's still the head honcho of Star Wars. She could put her foot down and say, no, I don't like that. You guys need to go back and do it. I mean, they're the ones with the power in this, situation. But then you look at the negatives, right? And of course, the big first one is the sequel trilogy. I mean, that alone derails almost everything, because that is the absolute core of Star Wars. And when you mess that up, it has ripple effects everywhere, which you and I have talked about. Then you have shows like The Acolyte, which didn't do as well. Book of Boba Fett, Kenobi didn't do particularly well. Ahsoka, I would even say, is almost Dave Filoni's first kind of misstep. I mean, it was okay. I don't think it really hit as well as they wanted it to. And you can say, well, that's Dave Filoni messing it up, not Kathleen Kennedy, but she's still the head of Star Wars. She is the one who everyone answers to, and she's the one who has ultimate creative control to say, all right, what are we doing here? Because she answers to Bob Iger, and before Bob Chapek, and then, back before Bob Iger, right? That's who they call her to say, hey, what's going on with this show and how's it looking? And then, so it's still her call on those things. But then I would say the most egregious part of her tenure at Star Wars, even worse perhaps than the sequel trilogy, is all of the almost hundreds, right? I mean, how many projects did they say this is in development and then nothing ever came from it? And you built this hype, you built all these fans wondering where things are, and that has huge ripple effects and has done so much damage to the Star Wars brand that big actors and things won't want to go near it. Right, dude. Because it's like, well, we were supposed to get a Lando show. We were supposed to get a sequel, a trilogy from Dan and Dave, the Game of Thrones guys. We were supposed to get a Ryan Johnson trilogy. Rogue Squadron was announced and canceled, and then we're brought back, and who even knows where it's at anymore. And then we're going to be getting a Taika Waititi movie, right? And then nothing about that. So I will say, if you look at Kathleen Kennedy's entire legacy as the head of Star Wars, I don't think it's a very positive one. There are some good moments.
Right.
But I would say start to finish, not particularly that great. Even High Republic. Look at how they built this whole thing.
I know.
And it fell completely flat.
Flopped. It flopped. I hate to say that. Like, dude, we freaking root for Star Wars. We want Star Wars to be successful. And so when it's not, I'm not going to sit around here and freaking, I don't know, blow smoke up somebody's what just to sort of make it seem like it's something that it's not, that it's awesome. It really needed to be called out. And I hate that there was all these different games about like, it was super politically charged. There was tons of things about racism and all these different, the toxic fan base and the different things that were coming out. It's like that there needs to be some accountability. I mean, like there needs to be some respect in terms of just like, coming out. There's one time where I can remember where she came out and said, like, we learned from the sequels and that we had a lot to learn. And even JJ came out and said, like, planning was important to that. And we didn't have it. We weren't planning ahead. We were not thinking and working cohesively as a team. So it's a huge fumble to start out the gate with the sequels and to say you have. So people wonder why this decision for her to retire or step away is so talked about in Star Wars. And it goes back to the sequels because, as you said, the foundation of Disney Star Wars is the sequels. And they were not great. They just were not good. They're not good enough. And there was no plan. And I really wrestle and I try to figure out what the story is that they were telling there and what's the messaging, and just how could you have such a big fumble out the gate? When you've bought this, and did you rush this? Did you rush to try to capitalize on the IP, or what's the deal there? Because to say that they didn't fumble, and I'm glad that they did acknowledge it, and eventually, like the likes of Mark Hamill came out and had issues with The Last Jedi. Daisy Ridley came out and said, we didn't know whether I was a Kenobi, a Skywalker, a Palpatine. We didn't know what or who I was going to be mid-shoot, right? It seemed like there was no plan. And then you have, again, just... that is directly under her leadership, and it kind of taints it. It kind of makes it hard for us to look at other things and not be super critical when you start. If you would have started off like with a banger, if the sequels start off and you've got 1, 2, and 3, Matt, and they are freaking just phenomenal, right? And they're at least in terms of story, there's a beginning, middle, and end, and you knew that they had thought it through and they organized this, and maybe it didn't quite land, and maybe there's some politics or whatever, but at least it made sense, and you felt like they had this cohesive vision. I feel like her whole legacy at Lucasfilm would have been different, and it's the fact that we started off with a piss poor, trilogy that I feel like it's hard for her to get these wins later on, or for people to acknowledge when she is doing a good job or when she does make good calls, because that just tainted her reign.